They say the ocean always calls to us, its waves whispering promises of peace, its rhythm steady against the chaos of our lives. But these days, the sound doesn't comfort me. It doesn't calm the ache in my chest. Instead, the waves sound like time slipping away, reminding me that what once was vibrant and full has now gone still and hollow. The sea used to sing to me. Now, it only echoes my silence, a silence left behind by a man who never truly saw me, and by children who no longer seem to remember the woman who gave up everything for them. This is my story, a quiet unraveling of dreams, a long road through betrayal, and perhaps, if I'm lucky, a path toward a freedom I waited too long to claim. I don't share it for sympathy. I share it because somewhere out there, someone like me needs to hear it. Someone needs to know they aren't alone. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 70 years old, and I never imagined that I would spend my golden years like this, sitting in a house that once overflowed with life, now echoing with memories that no one else seems to care about anymore. A house by the beach. Our dream. The one Richard and I talked about in our youth when we were still figuring out what it meant to be a family. Back then, we imagined a place where our children, Lauren and Michael, could grow up with sun-kissed summers and salty air, where we'd host holiday dinners, laugh over old stories, and someday, maybe even watch our grandchildren play along the shore. But dreams fade. Now, that house feels more like a tomb, a beautiful prison dressed in peeling paint and echoes of laughter long gone. When Richard passed 3 years ago, I thought my heart broke for the man I lost. But over time, I realized I was grieving a fantasy. He was never really the man I believed him to be. And as for my children, they've become strangers too. Richard Price. To our children, he was a towering figure, steady, composed, charismatic. He could walk into a room and own it with nothing more than a nod and that practiced, charming smile. To Michael, he was a hero. To Lauren, he was the gold standard for what a man should be. But to me, he was a shadow I lived under for more than 4 decades, a tall, cold presence that darkened every corner of my identity. There were moments, I admit, when I thought I loved him, when I wanted so desperately to believe that we were something real, but most days it felt like performing a role. Wife, mother, caretaker. Never just Eleanor. Ours wasn't a marriage built on love. It was built on obligation, on keeping up appearances. I gave up everything I once dreamed of, teaching abroad, opening a small bookstore, even learning to paint, all for the sake of family, for the illusion that we were happy. I stayed because that's what women of my generation did. We stayed, we endured. I made the house beautiful. I filled it with warmth. I put on a smile, even when my heart ached. I celebrated Richard's accomplishments and kept quiet about his cruelty, and I raised our children to believe in him, even when he failed me, because I thought that's what a good mother did. But when he died, when the man who always acted like he had everything under control finally left this world, he left behind a mess I couldn't have imagined, debts, secrets, a financial ruin he never once spoke about. I stood alone in the living room, his favorite leather chair still warm from the sun, papers scattered on the dining table, mortgage payments, unpaid property taxes, credit lines I didn't even know we had. Richard never trusted me with anything, not his heart, not his worries, not even his checkbook, and yet I stayed. For years, I stayed. Now, I was left with nothing but the crumbling walls of our so-called dream. The beach house was no longer a place of laughter. It was a financial anchor pulling me deeper into despair. And where were my children? Lauren was off in a world of designer dresses, high-end brunches, and bridal magazines, so obsessed with curating her perfect life that she couldn't see the cracks in mine. And Michael always followed her lead. Quiet, loyal, present, but never really there. They didn't see me. They still don't. There were days I would sit alone at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped edges of my coffee cup, wondering where the years had gone, wondering who I might have become if I had dared to choose myself just once. The dreams I had as a girl, those quiet secret wishes I never dared speak aloud, they drifted away like smoke in Richard's presence. He was never overtly cruel, not in the ways that left bruises, but he knew how to diminish me with a look, how to twist silence into punishment. He controlled the household like a benevolent dictator, never shouting, never hitting, but ensuring I always knew my place. I remember once, early in our marriage, I suggested we take a modest trip, just the two of us. I had saved a small amount from tutoring. When I mentioned it to him, he laughed, not unkindly, but with a dismissive wave. "Why would we waste money on something frivolous like that?" he said. And that was that. I tucked the idea away, like so many others. Over time, I stopped asking, stopped dreaming, stopped believing that my life was my own. Even now, after his death, I find myself making excuses for him, catching my breath when I say something unflattering, as though his ghost might scold me for speaking ill of him. That's how deep his presence ran, how completely he had built the walls around my life. And the children, I don't blame them, not entirely. They only knew the version of him he wanted them to see. He was warm in their eyes, generous with his praise, attentive at school functions. They didn't see the way he dismissed me after guests left. They didn't see how he'd speak to me when no one else was around. The subtle sighs, the rolling eyes, the way he'd place his hand on mine during dinner parties only to pull away sharply once the last guest had gone. To them, he was the smiling father in pressed slacks and polished shoes, holding Lauren's hand as she twirled in her new dress or ruffling Michael's hair after a piano recital. To me, he was silence, coldness, calculation. Even at the end, he kept in secrets. After the funeral, one of those large impersonal affairs filled with catered food and distant relatives, I sat alone with the lawyer, a man Richard had chosen and trusted. He laid out folders, long spreadsheets, and legal documents I'd never seen before. "You didn't know about any of this?" he asked gently, eyebrows raised. I shook my head. "I didn't even know we had a second mortgage. I didn't know we were on the verge of default." He had spent money like it grew in the garden and died with nothing but debts and a half-lived lie. I was too ashamed to tell Lauren or Michael. I knew what they'd say. Or worse, what they wouldn't. So I stayed silent, and I tried to hold the house together. That house by the beach? It had once felt like a promise, a place for the grandchildren to play, for holidays by the sea, for memories to bloom like the wildflowers that used to grow along the porch railing. Richard used to say, "This house will be your security when I'm gone." How cruel those words feel now, knowing he left me nothing but unpaid loans and a crumbling foundation, both literal and emotional. But Lauren had dreams for the house, big ones. She wanted her wedding there, always had, since she was 15 and fell in love with the idea of white roses trailing down the wooden staircase and a sunset ceremony on the deck. When she got engaged, she called me, her voice sparkling through the phone. "Mom, it's time. I want the wedding at the house." And I said yes, not because I could afford it, not because I had the energy to host 120 guests, but because for a split second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be a way back into her heart, a way for her to see me again, not as the woman who folded laundry in the background, but as her mother. The one who stayed, who held everything together, even when it was falling apart. I didn't tell her the roof leaked. I didn't tell her I was 3 months behind on the electricity bill. Instead, I dusted off the old silverware, opened the windows to air out the musty bedrooms, and began cleaning, room by room, day by day, until my hands ached. But it wasn't enough for her. "It's outdated," she said, frowning at the furniture. "We can't have people over with it looking like this. The walls are the wrong color, and the kitchen needs to be redone before I can even consider bringing the caterers in." I bit my tongue. I nodded. I smiled. And that smile was like glass in my mouth, because all I wanted was for her to say, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for keeping this house alive. Thank you for all you've done." But she didn't. And I knew then that her wedding wasn't about family. It wasn't about legacy or love or connection. It was about appearances. It was about impressing people who wouldn't remember the color of the drapes or the condition of the porch swing. It was about crafting the perfect illusion, just like her father had. I told myself I could live with the criticism, that it was only temporary, that once the wedding was over and Lauren had her perfect day, she'd look at me differently, that she'd see what I had carried alone for years, the weight of silence, of sacrifice, of loyalty to a man who only ever saw her, never me. But every time she walked through the house, her arms crossed, eyes scanning with judgment, something inside me dimmed a little more. "This has to go," she said one afternoon, gesturing to the old armchair where Richard used to sit with a book he never really read. "And the rug, too. It's hideous. I don't even know how you lived with this stuff for so long." I stared at the chair. It was the same one I sat beside while knitting in the evenings, the same one Michael used to crawl into after nightmares, the same chair that had outlived the man himself. And yet, to her, it was just ugly, just another thing that didn't fit her curated aesthetic. "You want to gut the house?" I said quietly. "Not decorate it." She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Mom, you always get so sentimental. It's just stuff. Just stuff. Just a house. Just a woman who raised her through fevers, heartbreaks, and long nights waiting for her to come home safely." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. That night, I lay awake, listening to the ocean beyond the open window. The waves had always comforted me, their rhythm, their reliability, the way they reminded me that life kept moving even when mine felt stuck. But that night, they felt different, distant, almost indifferent. I was tired. I hadn't admitted that to anyone, not even myself, fully. But I was tired of pretending, tired of watching my life be reduced to a backdrop for someone else's moment. I called Michael the next day. He was always softer than Lauren, quieter, less prone to grand gestures, but often thoughtful in the small ways, birthday cards, a random phone call, a book he thought I'd like. I told him how I felt, not all of it, just a sliver, enough to test the water. "Lauren wants to redo the whole house for the wedding," I said. He was silent for a moment. "Are you okay with that?" I paused. Then I lied. "Yes," because it was easier than hearing him take her side. "She's got a vision, I guess," he said carefully. "She's always been particular." That was his way of saying, "She's always been difficult." I sighed. "I just want it to go smoothly." "Mom," he said, and his voice shifted warmer now, "you don't have to twist yourself into knots for her. You've already done enough." I wanted to cry then, but I didn't, because what did it mean to have one child who saw you but wouldn't stand up for you? A few days later, Lauren sent over an interior decorator, a young woman with red glasses and an iPad full of Pinterest boards. She walked through my home like it was a blank canvas, talking about statement lighting, textured walls, and elevated coastal nostalgia. I wanted to scream. This wasn't a photo shoot. It was my life. But instead, I made tea. I smiled. I nodded. Because that's what I always did. Until my birthday came, it had slipped my mind at first. So consumed I was with swatches of paint and invoices. But then, a week before, I remembered, not because anyone mentioned it, but because I found an old card tucked in a drawer from a time when Lauren used to make them by hand. I hadn't planned a party. I hadn't mentioned it to them. I didn't want to seem needy, but I hoped, foolishly, that one of them might remember, that they might come, and so I made dinner, a small one, roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans with garlic, the things they used to love as children. I baked the chocolate cake Lauren always asked for when she was little, the one with thick frosting and too many sprinkles. I set the table. I lit the candles. I waited. The hours passed. The food grew cold. The candles melted to nubs. The silence became unbearable. At first, I told myself they were late. Then I told myself they forgot. Then, finally, I stopped telling myself anything at all. When I called Lauren, her phone went to voicemail. Michael picked up, eventually, distracted, apologetic. "I thought it was tomorrow," he said, his voice tinny with background noise. "We'll celebrate next time, okay?" Next time. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. The cake sat untouched on the counter. The house echoed with the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from absence, from being forgotten. And that night, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, finally, like the soft click of a door closing that you know will never open again. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had risen. The coffee had gone cold, the breakfast untouched. All around me were the remains of the night before. The cake with a single slice missing, the plates I couldn't bring myself to clear, the candles melted down to nothing, and silence, that heavy, cruel silence again. I looked around at the house, my house, and for the first time in all these years, I didn't see home. I saw a museum of forgotten dreams, a place where I had folded pieces of myself into every corner, and yet somehow had become invisible. I stood and walked slowly from room to room. The living room, where I used to dance with Michael in his socks on rainy days. The hallway, where Lauren's crayon drawings once graced the walls before Richard made me scrub them off. The kitchen table, where I spent years serving everyone but myself, and the bedroom, still lined with Richard's old books and scentless cologne bottles. The same ones he never let me move. His presence still lingered like a ghost, a stern shadow stretching across every part of the house. I had given this home everything, and now it gave nothing back. That afternoon, I opened the desk drawer in the study and pulled out the file labeled mortgage. It had been growing heavier each month. The numbers didn't lie. Richard hadn't left me with security. He left me with debt disguised as stability. I flipped through the papers, slowly, deliberately. Every signature, every late fee, every line was a reminder that I had been living in a house built more on burden than love. It had once been our dream, a beachside escape, a place where we could grow old together. He promised me mornings with the sun in our window and evenings filled with grandkids and laughter. But after he passed, all that was left were overdue bills and children who visited only when they needed something. And now, even they didn't come. The ocean outside crashed against the shore as if to remind me, things change, tides turn, and sometimes letting go is not a loss, it's a release. I reached for my phone and hesitated, staring at the screen. I didn't want to call Lauren. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want another shallow apology or another promise to do better, so I called the real estate agent instead. "Hi," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "My name is Eleanor Price. I'd like to list my house." There was a pause on the other end, as if the woman was waiting for me to say more, but I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to justify myself. That evening, I sat by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned soft pink, then orange, then that deep, aching blue that always made me feel like something was ending. But this time, I wasn't afraid of the ending, because maybe, just maybe, it was also a beginning. I poured myself a glass of wine. I raised it slightly to the ocean. "To freedom," I whispered, letting the words hang in the air. And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to believe them. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her body was tired, but her mind raced, thoughts drifting like the waves beyond her window. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, memories pooling in the corners of her mind. She saw Richard in his reading chair, glasses sliding down his nose. She heard Michael's laughter echoing from the hallway. She remembered Lauren's tiny hands clutching her own on the front porch, asking if the stars could hear prayers. Eleanor had forgotten how much of herself was built into this place. In the morning, the decision she made felt even heavier, but not wrong. She began with the attic. Dust danced in the sunlight as she pushed open the door. It smelled of cedar and thyme. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, each one labeled in Richard's neat handwriting, Christmas ornaments, old bills, Lauren's drawings, Michael's trophies, and one simply marked Eleanor. She reached for that one first. Inside were fragments of a woman she'd nearly forgotten, her college poetry journal, faded letters from her sister, a dried bouquet from a recital long ago. There was even a photo of her at age 21, hair wild in the wind, eyes alight with something fierce. She barely recognized that girl. Tears welled in her eyes, not from grief but from surprise. That woman still existed. She was just buried under years of responsibility, of compromise, of trying to be the glue that held everyone together. For hours, Eleanor sifted through the past. Some items she set aside gently to keep, others she let go of, releasing their weight from her heart. Each box was a small goodbye to the role of the silent wife, the always giving mother, the woman who made herself smaller for everyone else's dreams. By afternoon, the attic was nearly empty. She moved downstairs and opened Michael's old room. The trophies still lined the shelf. Most improved? Best team player? District runner-up. He had been so proud of each one, even when his father dismissed them as participation prizes. Eleanor had stood behind Michael then, defending his joy. But in the years that followed, Michael stopped reaching out, stopped coming home. Maybe Richard's voice had echoed louder than hers. She picked up one of the trophies and whispered, "I was always proud of you." Then she opened the closet and found an old sweater, soft navy blue, with the school's logo embroidered on the sleeve. She pressed it to her chest and breathed in. It still smelled faintly of youth and summer and something safe. A lump formed in her throat, but she didn't cry. Instead, she folded the sweater and placed it in the donation box. Letting go wasn't the same as forgetting. In the evening, she walked out to the porch with a cup of tea. The air was cooler now, the waves gentler. She watched the seagulls glide across the horizon free and effortless. And then her phone buzzed. It was Lauren. Text message. "Hey Mom, sorry I missed your birthday. Things have been crazy. Can we talk soon?" Eleanor stared at the screen, heart pounding. Part of her wanted to reply, to say, "Of course," to pretend like nothing had happened, but another part, the one she was just beginning to listen to, told her not to rush. She let the message sit. That night, she slept better than she had in months. Not because everything was fixed, but because she was finally choosing herself. The next few mornings felt strangely peaceful. Eleanor moved slowly through the house, barefoot, not because she was trying to avoid waking anyone, there was no one left to wake, but because she wanted to feel every creak in the floorboards, every groove in the old wood, like a silent farewell. She made breakfast and sat at the kitchen table with the soft light pouring in through the curtains. For the first time in years, she wasn't cooking for someone else. Just toast, a soft-boiled egg, and a cup of strong black tea. No one asking for scrambled eggs, no one rejecting the toast because it was too dark. It was simple. It was hers. That silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. In the afternoons, she took to long walks along the beach. The sand, cool and soft beneath her feet, reminded her of summers long gone. She used to walk this same stretch of shore with Lauren as a little girl. Lauren would race ahead, collecting shells, pointing out driftwood shaped like animals. Eleanor had always stayed back, letting her daughter run wild, knowing that even when the tide washed the footprints away, the moment would stay etched in her heart. Now, the ocean whispered new things. Let go. Breathe. Start again. She brought a notebook on her walks now. It was old, something she'd picked up from a garage sale years ago and never used, but now she filled it with thoughts, with feelings, with pieces of poems and fragments of the woman she'd forgotten she used to be. On the third night, she sat at the kitchen table, pen poised above paper, and wrote a letter to each of her children. Not because she couldn't face them, but because there were things that needed to be said slowly, carefully, things that couldn't be shouted into a phone or typed into a text message. To Lauren, "My dear Lauren, you were my first light. The moment I held you, I knew love like I had never known it before. I watched you grow with pride and wonder. You were always so sure, so determined, so full of dreams. I wanted to give you everything: a safe home, a strong example, a mother who never faltered. But maybe I faltered by giving too much and expecting so little in return. I held on to this house for you, for the wedding you dreamed of, the one you wanted here, where the waves could sing you down the aisle. But what I realized is that I've been clinging to a home that was never seen as mine, only as a stage for someone else's perfect picture. I'm selling the house, Lauren, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because it's time for me to live. I hope one day you'll understand, and I hope that when you walk down whatever aisle life gives you, you remember that your mother finally chose to walk her own path too. Love always, Mom. To Michael, my sweet Michael, you were the quiet strength in my world. You didn't shout your needs. You waited patiently, and often, I fear, you were lost in the shadows. I'm sorry for that. You always did what was expected. You kept the peace, stayed in line, supported your sister, even when it cost you. I saw it, Michael. I saw you. I want you to know that I'm not asking for permission. I'm writing to share this with you, because I owe you honesty. I'm selling the house. I can't keep living in a place that feels more like a museum than a home, a place full of ghosts and expectations. I hope you'll understand, and I hope you'll remember that this isn't me giving up. It's me finally beginning. With all my heart, Mom. She sealed both letters with shaking hands, not because she was unsure, but because she knew the consequences. She might be met with silence. She might lose them, but she might also be planting seeds. Seeds of truth, of healing, of becoming. The next morning, she mailed the letters. No tracking, no express delivery. Just 2 envelopes slipped into the rusted mailbox at the edge of the lane like messages to the sea. Then she stood still. The breeze danced through her silver hair. The gulls cried in the distance. And for the first time in decades, Eleanor didn't feel like a background character. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something entirely her own. The days that followed were quiet, not the hollow quiet that once haunted Eleanor, but a thoughtful, almost sacred silence, a silence that felt like the world holding its breath. She didn't rush to check the mailbox. She didn't keep her phone close by. She simply waited. Each morning, she continued her walks. She no longer counted the steps or followed the same path. She wandered, letting the sand, the wind, and the sea tell her where to go. And slowly, she started to recognize herself again, not just as a mother or a widow, but as Eleanor. Just Eleanor. Some evenings, she'd sit in her little study, once Edward's office, now transformed into her own creative sanctuary. She painted with cheap watercolors, not for anyone else to see, but because she liked how the colors bled and blended like memories do. She read novels she'd bought years ago, but never had time to finish. She cried sometimes. Yes, grief is not a door that stays closed, but the tears weren't always for loss. Sometimes they were tears of release, of relief, of shedding layers that had hardened over the years. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight turned golden and lazy, there was a knock at the door. It startled her. Not many people visited anymore. Most of the neighbors were either tourists or seasonal renters. And even fewer dared to approach a home that had become, to the neighborhood, a ghost of its former self. She opened the door slowly. It was Michael. He stood there awkward, his hands in his pockets, his eyes soft with a mixture of guilt and something else she couldn't quite place. "Hi, Mom." The words were simple, but they carried a world behind them. Eleanor blinked, unsure what to say. "Michael," she said softly, "I didn't expect—" "I got your letter." Silence. He looked down at his shoes. "I didn't know— I knew things were hard, but I didn't really see it. I guess I didn't want to." She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, they sat in the living room. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts. Eleanor let the moment stretch. She had waited long enough for her children to speak. She wouldn't rush them now. Michael finally looked up. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. Not just on your birthday. For a lot of things." She nodded. "I know, but thank you." He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Lauren, she hasn't said much. She's angry, or maybe just hurt, but she read the letter. She cried. Eleanor's breath caught, but she said nothing. Michael continued. I think she's realizing some things. It's just going to take her longer. Eleanor reached out and placed her hand over his. I didn't write those letters to hurt either of you. I wrote them because I needed to tell the truth. For once. He squeezed her hand. And I'm glad you did. They talked long into the evening about the past, about Edward, about all the things that had been swept under the rug. It wasn't a clean conversation. There were still wounds, still confusion. But it was real, and that was enough. Before he left, Michael hugged her tightly, the kind of hug that said more than words ever could. Don't be a stranger, she whispered into his shoulder. I won't, he promised. The next day, Eleanor stood on the porch, tea in hand, watching the waves roll in. She felt different, lighter. The house hadn't sold yet, but her soul had already moved out of the past, and for the first time, she didn't fear what came next. She welcomed it. It was almost 2 weeks after Michael's visit. Eleanor hadn't expected much. She had learned not to tie her peace to expectations. The ocean taught her that, to let go, to release control, to trust that the tides would return what was meant for her in time. Still, a part of her wondered about Lauren. And then, one morning, it happened. She was out tending to the small garden boxes she'd placed on her apartment's narrow balcony, tomatoes, herbs, a few stubborn blooms, when her phone buzzed. A message. From Lauren. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long moment before unlocking it. The message was brief. Can we talk? There were no apologies, no explanations. But it was enough. They met at a quiet cafe near the old church, halfway between where Lauren lived and Eleanor's small seaside apartment. The sky was overcast, soft gray clouds hanging like damp cotton, and Eleanor had brought a scarf, though she wasn't sure if it was for the chill or just the comfort of having something to hold on to. When Lauren walked in, Eleanor's breath caught. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally worn, the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy for too long. They sat. Neither spoke right away. The waitress brought coffee. The steam curled upward between them like a veil. Lauren finally broke the silence. I read your letter. 12 times. Eleanor watched her daughter carefully, unsure of what was coming next. I hated it at first, Lauren admitted, her voice trembling. I hated you for writing it. I thought, how dare she say these things, after everything she did, or didn't do. I was so angry. Eleanor nodded slowly. I expected you would be. But then, Lauren continued, her voice softening, I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The fights between you and Dad, the way you'd disappear into the kitchen when things got tense, the way you'd always try to smooth everything over afterward like nothing happened. Eleanor's hands tightened around her mug. I guess I never let myself think of you as anything other than Mom. Just Mom, the one who's supposed to be strong, selfless, always there. I never thought of you as a woman. A person? Eleanor blinked against the sting in her eyes. I was selfish, Lauren whispered. I was cruel. I wanted things from you that you couldn't give, or maybe you had nothing left to give, and I didn't want to see that. The words hung between them, not quite forgiveness, but something close. I wasn't perfect, Eleanor said quietly. I made my share of mistakes, but I did love you. I still do. I know, Lauren said, and I loved you. I do. I just didn't know how to show it. They sat there for a long time, sipping coffee, the silence not uncomfortable now, just spacious. Eventually, Lauren reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. I want to try again, she said, and with that simple gesture, that small bridge of fingers over Formica, something shifted. Not everything was fixed, but healing had begun. That night, Eleanor stood on her balcony watching the ocean again. The wind carried the scent of salt and blooming jasmine. Somewhere below, a couple laughed, their voices rising and falling like waves. She closed her eyes and smiled. Her children had begun to return, not as the perfect people she had once hoped they'd be, but as humans, flawed, healing, real. And maybe that was better. She wasn't rebuilding the past. She was building something new, brick by brick, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, word by word. It had been 3 months since that first coffee with Lauren. Since then, they had shared 6 more. They weren't easy. There were awkward silences, missteps, and the occasional sting of old wounds reopened. But there was also laughter, shy at first, then freer, and moments when Eleanor caught glimpses of the little girl Lauren used to be, the one who used to dance barefoot on the porch while Eleanor clapped along from the steps. It reminded Eleanor that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about remembering differently. Still, even with that fragile connection beginning to mend, the apartment sometimes felt too quiet, too still. And that's when Eleanor did something unexpected. She volunteered. It started small. There was a flyer at the local library. Looking for volunteers. Read to seniors at Maplewood Care Center, Tuesdays and Thursdays. She tore the tab off the bottom without much thought. A week later, she found herself standing in front of a room full of quiet, weathered faces. Most were older than her, though some looked younger in the way that suffering can age a person prematurely. They sat in recliners and wheelchairs, wrapped in faded blankets, some with oxygen tanks humming faintly by their side. Eleanor had brought a worn copy of Little Women. She cleared her throat and read. Something magical happened in that room as her voice filled the space. Eyes that had seemed cloudy moments ago began to sparkle. A woman named Beatrice laughed when Eleanor did a dramatic impression of Aunt March. A man named Frank dozed peacefully as Eleanor read the quieter chapters, his hand twitching gently with dreams. For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel invisible. She felt needed. Not because she could give money or fix someone's problem, but because her presence mattered, because her voice could soothe, because her stories, even the borrowed ones, could carry people somewhere else, if only for an hour. She began coming every week, then twice a week, then more. Soon the reading circle became a storytelling circle. Eleanor would tell her own stories, the funny ones from her youth, the ones she hadn't dared to remember for decades, like the time she skipped school to see Elvis in concert, or how Richard had proposed to her at a drive-in movie theater with a ring hidden in a popcorn box. The seniors began to open up too. They shared stories of war and romance, of heartbreaks and glories, of children lost and found. One day Beatrice squeezed her hand and said, "You remind me of my sister. She used to read to me too, before she passed." Eleanor felt the tears rise, but she didn't let them fall. She just smiled. "Then I'll keep reading, for both of us." Outside, the ocean kept on with its endless song. Inside, Eleanor's heart was quietly rebuilding itself, not through grand gestures or dramatic reunions, but through presence, through connection, through choosing each day to show up. It was a Tuesday afternoon, heavy with coastal fog, when Eleanor received a letter, not an email, not a text, a real letter, hand-addressed, slightly wrinkled, like it had traveled far. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting wasn't. She had memorized every loop and slant of it from a time when he was still a boy and left sticky notes on the fridge. "I fed the cat. I love you, Mom." It was from Michael. Her breath caught as she opened it, unfolding the page with trembling fingers. "Mom, I don't really know how to start this. I've rewritten this letter 10 times and nothing seems right, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about Dad, about the house. I heard from Lauren. She said you sold the house and that I should talk to you. I didn't call. I didn't think I had the right. Maybe I still don't. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have come to your birthday. I should have been there for you. After Dad died, during all those months when you were alone. I was angry for reasons that don't even make sense to me anymore. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I just didn't know how to deal with all of it. But you didn't deserve that. You've always been the one who kept everything together, and I let you slip through the cracks. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you're okay. If you ever want to write back, I'm here. Love, Michael Eleanor sat with the letter for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't rush to respond. She just held it to her chest, let the silence settle around her like a blanket. Warm, not cold this time. That night, she reread the letter under a soft lamp, then pulled out an old wooden box from the back of her closet. It was filled with photographs, school drawings, birthday cards, fragments of a family she had once believed was forever intact. She found one photo. Michael, at 10, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught at the lake. His smile was wild and bright. Her hand was resting on his shoulder in the background. She hadn't thought of that trip in years. She remembered how he'd cried when they had to let the fish go, how she'd held him that night in the cabin and told him, "Letting go doesn't mean you didn't love it. It just means you loved it enough to do what's right." Funny, she thought. Maybe she needed to hear that again herself. The next morning she wrote back, "Dear Michael, I got your letter. Thank you for writing it. You're right. It wasn't easy. None of it was. But I've learned that holding on to hurt is like keeping a room in your heart locked away. Eventually, it starts to gather dust and no light can get in. So I'm unlocking that door now. I forgive you, not because I'm supposed to, but because I love you and I want peace more than I want punishment. There's so much I'd like to tell you, but maybe we can take it slow. Maybe you could write again or visit. I'm still here, and I think I'm stronger than I've ever been. Love, Mom." When she dropped the letter in the mailbox, Eleanor didn't expect anything. She had let go of expectations, but she allowed herself just for a moment to hope, not for things to return to the way they were, but for something new, something honest. The days that followed Eleanor's letter felt different. She no longer woke to the same dull ache in her chest. The apartment, though still quiet, no longer felt quite so lonely. Her morning coffee tasted less bitter. Her walks along the bay seemed filled with more color, more sound, as if the world around her had noticed the tiny crack of light in her heart and was shining through it. Still, she didn't expect a reply. But 2 weeks later, one came. "Mom, I've read your letter 3 times now. The first time, I cried. The second, I smiled. The third, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we still have time. I'd like to visit, not just to say sorry in person, though I need to do that too, but because I miss you, and there's someone else I'd like you to meet. Her name is Lily. She's 6. She's got your eyes. She's my daughter, Mom, your granddaughter. I want her to know you. If it's too much, I understand. But if you're ready, we could come next weekend." Love, Michael Eleanor's hands trembled as she set the letter down. A granddaughter. He had a child, and he wanted her to meet him, to meet them. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself. The lines around her eyes were deeper now, her hair grayer, but there was still something fierce in her reflection, something that said, "You're not finished yet." That weekend, Eleanor baked apple muffins, not because she expected anyone to eat them, but because she needed to do something with her hands. She swept the apartment 3 times, fluffed the pillows on the couch, then took them off and started again. Her heart rattled with nerves and anticipation. And then, finally, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Michael stood there, older, yes, but still her son. His eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he stepped forward, and in an instant they were wrapped in each other's arms. Not tight, not desperate, just enough. Behind him, a little girl peeked out. She had dark curls, a curious stare, and something delicate in the way she tilted her head, something unmistakably familiar. "Lily," Michael said, kneeling. "This is Grandma Eleanor." Eleanor knelt too, unsure of what to say, but she didn't need to speak. Lily stepped forward and reached out a small hand. "Do you like tea parties?" Eleanor blinked, then smiled. "I love them." That afternoon, the 3 of them sat on the living room floor with mismatched teacups Eleanor hadn't used in years. Lily poured imaginary tea into tiny porcelain cups, and Eleanor listened as Michael talked about his life. about the years he had spent drifting, lost in grief after his father's death, unsure how to find his way back. He spoke of Lily's mother, of how things hadn't worked out, but how they were doing their best to raise her together, of how he'd grown up too fast, and yet, somehow, not fast enough. Eleanor listened, and didn't interrupt. She just took it in. It was the kind of conversation they should have had years ago, but they were having it now, and that mattered. In the weeks that followed, visits became regular. Lily brought drawings, Eleanor kept them on the fridge, Michael stayed for dinner. Sometimes he helped wash dishes. They didn't talk about the past often, but when they did, it no longer stung. It felt like clearing out an old room, dusty but necessary. One night, as Michael was putting Lily's coat on, he turned to Eleanor. "She's lucky, you know," he said quietly. Eleanor raised a brow. "Why's that?" "Because she's getting to know you, the way I should have, a long time ago." Eleanor didn't reply. She just kissed Lily on the forehead and whispered, "Come back soon, sweetheart." Spring arrived, gentle and slow, brushing the bay with soft winds and the scent of salt and jasmine. Eleanor found herself painting again, something she hadn't done since she was in her 30s. The first painting was of the ocean, gray and infinite. The second was of a child's teacup. The third was a portrait of Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a stuffed bear. She didn't show anyone those paintings. Not yet. But she hung them on the wall across from her bed. Each morning, they reminded her that healing wasn't about returning to the past. It was about building something new. Brick by brick, hug by hug, letter by letter. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed one quiet Sunday afternoon, fingers tracing the edge of a folded letter she hadn't yet opened. It had arrived a few days ago. No return address, just a name she hadn't said out loud in years. Lauren, her daughter, the one who had vanished without saying goodbye, the one who hadn't come home even when Richard died, the one Eleanor had once tucked in every night with a lullaby and dreams of the stars. She'd been so angry for so long, but Eleanor had also learned something over the last few months. Pain grows heavier the longer you carry it alone. And now, with Lily's laughter echoing in her home, with Michael slowly becoming a son again, Eleanor felt strong enough to open the past, one page at a time. "Dear Mom, I don't know where to begin. Maybe I should have written years ago. Maybe you wouldn't even read this. But I'm writing now because I miss you. I was wrong to stay away after Dad died. I told myself you didn't want to hear from me, that you were better off. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of what we'd say to each other. Scared of the pain we'd both buried. But time has a cruel way of showing us the things we should have faced. I heard about the house. I know what happened, and I've been following you, not in person, but in small ways. I found Michael's photos online. Lily is beautiful. She looks like you, you know. I don't deserve to ask this, but if there's even a small piece of you that still loves me, would you be willing to see me? If not, I understand. But if you can, I'd like to come home. Love, Lauren Eleanor read the letter twice, then a third time. She didn't cry, not because it didn't move her. It did, but because her tears had already been spent. What she felt now was something quieter, a kind of stillness, a space opening where resentment used to live. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive Lauren completely, but she was willing to try. So she wrote back, "Lauren, you're right. It has been a long time, too long, and yes, there's still a piece of me that loves you, that never stopped loving you. That's why your absence hurt as much as it did. I don't need perfect apologies. I just need the truth, and the truth is, I want to see you too. Come by next Sunday. Lily would love to meet her aunt. I'll be here. Love, Mom." That Sunday arrived with the kind of golden morning that smelled like hope, sunlight streaming through the windows, birds singing near the bay. Eleanor made the tea strong, the way Lauren had liked it when she was a teenager. She pulled out the photo albums, unsure if she'd show them, but wanting them close, just in case. And then, the knock. She opened the door. Lauren stood there, older, more tired than Eleanor remembered, but still undeniably her daughter. Her eyes brimmed with something raw, something real. Neither of them said a word. They just looked. And then, without planning it, without thinking it through, Eleanor reached forward and pulled her daughter into her arms. They held each other like two women who had survived the same war, and in many ways they had. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor whispered, "You came back." Lauren nodded, her voice cracking. "I never stopped wanting to." Inside, Lily greeted her aunt with a grin and a drawing. "Do you like unicorns?" she asked. Lauren laughed, the sound hoarse, but beautiful. "I used to. Maybe I still do." And just like that, the silence that had filled the years between them began to lift. Not entirely, but enough. That evening, the 3 generations sat at the table, Eleanor, her children, and her granddaughter. The air was filled with quiet stories, awkward laughter, and the unmistakable scent of something healing. It wasn't perfect. The past still lived in the corners of the room, but so did the future. A few weeks had passed since Lauren's return. Each Sunday, they gathered at Eleanor's small apartment by the bay. Sometimes Michael would bring dinner. Sometimes Lauren and Lily baked cookies, filling the kitchen with laughter and flour. The silences weren't gone, but they had softened, like old ghosts learning to whisper. Eleanor was quiet most days. She didn't speak much about the years they lost. She didn't need to. But as autumn crept in and the days grew shorter, her body began to slow down. She noticed it in little things, a stiffness in her joints, a shortness of breath that lingered longer than usual, a tiredness that sleep couldn't erase. She didn't want to worry anyone. She had only just gotten them back. One chilly morning, she sat by the window with a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Lauren arrived unannounced, carrying a small bag of groceries and her usual bright smile. "Hey, Mom," she said gently. "You look pale." Eleanor forced a smile. "Just tired." Lauren stepped closer, frowning as she touched her mother's forehead. "You're burning up." Eleanor waved her hand. "It's nothing." But Lauren wasn't that girl who used to walk away anymore. She picked up the phone, called Michael, and within the hour they were driving Eleanor to the doctor. The diagnosis wasn't terrible, but it wasn't comforting either. Pneumonia. Mild, but enough to be dangerous at her age. She was admitted for observation, and for the first time in decades, Eleanor found herself in a hospital bed not alone, but surrounded by her children. Lauren stayed late into the night, holding her mother's hand. "I should have been there," she whispered. "All those years. I'm so sorry, Mom." Eleanor, weak but lucid, turned to her. "You're here now. That's all that matters." Michael stood by the window, arms crossed, tears in his eyes. "We took you for granted," he said. "I see that now. I see you now." Eleanor smiled faintly, eyes soft. "That's all I ever wanted." Over the next few days, as her strength slowly returned, something shifted in the family. Lauren and Michael began speaking to each other more, not just about their mother, but about their own lives. They began remembering who they used to be before time and pride pulled them apart. One evening, Lauren brought Lily to visit. The little girl climbed into bed with Eleanor, curling up beside her like she had always belonged there. "Grandma," Lily whispered, "can I draw you something while you rest?" Eleanor nodded, eyes brimming. "I'd love that, sweetheart." As Lily sat on the nearby chair, sketching with quiet focus, Eleanor watched her family, her children, her granddaughter, and thought about how long it had taken to reach this moment. She had almost lost everything, but life, in its strange and silent mercy, had given her another chance. A week after returning home, Eleanor sat by the window again, this time wrapped in a quilt Michael had found in a box of her old things, hand-stitched, faded in color, but still soft and warm. The house no longer felt as cold or silent. There were footsteps now, laughter, the sound of her granddaughter's small voice humming to herself in the hallway. It was Lauren, who noticed the notebook on the table. "Mom, what's this?" Eleanor smiled. "I've been writing." Lauren looked at the cover, a simple navy blue journal with worn edges. I thought maybe, if I don't get another 20 years, I should leave something behind. Not for the world, just for you and Michael. And Lily someday. So you'll know who I was before I became just Mom. Lauren swallowed hard and sat down beside her. I want to hear it. So Eleanor opened the journal and read the first page aloud, a story about her first dance with their father Richard in the old community hall when she was just 17. Her voice trembled but didn't break. The memory was sweet, not bitter. Lauren listened, her eyes shining. "Keep going," she whispered. And so Eleanor read another page, then another. From that day on, every afternoon, she would read aloud a new chapter of her life. Childhood days on a dusty Oklahoma farm, her first heartbreak, the long years of sacrifice, and the dreams she never dared say out loud. Michael began to join them too, sitting quietly at first. Then, one day, he brought a photo album and placed it on her lap. "I've been going through these," he said. "I forgot how much you held this family together." Eleanor didn't say anything. She simply took his hand. That Saturday, Lauren had an idea. "What if we have a little gathering?" she asked. "Just us. You, me, Michael, Lily. A celebration." Eleanor blinked. "For what?" "For you," Lauren said. "For coming back to life." They chose a Sunday afternoon. Lauren made her famous pot roast. Michael brought wine. Lily decorated the kitchen with handmade paper flowers and a glitter-covered banner that read, "Welcome home, Grandma." It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't loud, but it was perfect. They ate together, talked, listened to the ocean outside the window. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no resentment lurking beneath the surface. Just love. At the end of the meal, Aunt Lauren stood and raised a glass. "To Mom," she said. "To the woman who gave us everything, even when we didn't know how to say thank you. We see you now. We love you." Eleanor's lips trembled, but no tears fell. She was stronger than that. "Then let's live like we mean it," she said, voice steady. "No more missed birthdays, no more silence, just time, while we still have it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Michael raised his glass too. "To time and to Mom." As autumn rolled in with its golden light and drifting leaves, Eleanor kept writing. Her health was fragile, but her mind sharp and her heart steady with purpose. Every day she penned more pages, curled up in the same window seat where she once waited in silence. Now, she wrote not to fill the silence, but to pass something on, a truth, a map of the human heart. Lauren helped her organize the pages. "Are you sure you want to call it this?" she asked one afternoon, reading the title on the first page. Eleanor smiled. "The years I wasn't seen." "Yes," she said, "because now I finally am." Winter came. The beach outside their small home turned quiet, but inside the house pulsed with warmth. Lauren and Michael took turns visiting every evening. Sometimes they brought dinner, sometimes they just sat. Michael even began recording Eleanor reading passages from her journal. "I want Lily to hear your voice when she's older," he said. One night, as snow dusted the windows, Lily climbed onto Eleanor's lap, her small fingers brushing over the pages of the journal. "What's this story, Grandma?" she asked. Eleanor looked down. The page held a simple memory, a moment when she had danced barefoot in the kitchen with Richard, a record spinning, her laughter loud and young. "That's when I was your age," she said, tapping Lily's nose. "Before I was a mother, before I was a grandmother, I was just Eleanor, a girl with her whole heart open. Were you happy? I was beginning to learn how to be." As spring arrived, the book was finished. Lauren had it printed and bound, not for sale, not for shelves, but for family. 5 copies, one for Eleanor, one for Lauren, one for Michael, one for Lily, to be given when she turned 18, and one tucked away, just in case someone else someday needed it. On Eleanor's 76th birthday, the family gathered again. This time, it wasn't just a meal, it was a tribute. Michael read aloud from the first chapter. Lauren cried through the third, and when Eleanor, hands trembling, signed the inside cover of Lily's copy, she wrote, "For my granddaughter, so you will always know. You are seen, you are loved, and you are never too old or too young to begin again." That night, Eleanor stood by the window. The ocean roared as it always had, but this time it didn't feel lonely. She had written her story. She had reclaimed her voice, and now, in the rhythm of the waves, she heard not silence, but legacy. She whispered into the wind, "I was here, and I mattered,